فصل في الغسل. A section on the ritual bath or ghusl. يجب الغسل من ثلاثة أشياء. الجنابة والحيض والنفاس. The ghusl or the full body wash is an obligation due to three things. Major ritual impurity, janaba, menstruation or hayd, والنفاس, postpartum bleeding. Each one of these, the author will discuss them. الجنابة قسمان. أحدهما خروج المني بلذة معتادة في نوم أو يقظة بجماع أو غيره. As for major ritual impurity, or janaba, it is of two kinds. The emission of fluid as a result of normal sexual pleasure, whether while sleeping or awake, as a result of intercourse or some other means. So for the man, the ejaculation of mani, which in his case is the thick whitish fluid that comes out with force. And in the case of the woman, the mani for her is a thin yellowish fluid that does not come out with force. So if this fluid is released, whether through normal sexual pleasure, with normal sexual pleasure, whether while sleeping or awake, sleeping such as if they experience a dream and there's an ejaculation of fluid, or awake as a result of intercourse or some other means, then it puts that person in a state of janaba. So he mentions as a result of normal sexual pleasure. If a person does not experience normal sexual pleasure during the ejaculation of the fluid, then it's not considered that it puts this person in a state of janaba. So if a person has a sickness or something happens, there's a shock to his body, and this fluid is ejected, then it does not put the person in a state of janaba because it's not something normal. As a result of intercourse, whether it's permissible or not, or some other means, whether it's permissible or not, such as for a man, masturbation, even though it's haram for him to do, if he does it and there's an ejaculation of the fluid, it puts him in a state of major ritual impurity, a state of janaba. والثاني مغيب الحشفة في الفرج ومن رأى في منامه كأنه يجامع ولم يخرج منه مني فلا شيء عليه. The second thing that would cause a person to be in a state of major ritual impurity is the dipping of glands, the glands of the private part for the male of the penis into the inner folds of a woman's private part. So the glands or the tip of the penis, if it were to be inserted into the woman's private part, even if there's no ejaculation of fluid, and even if it is only for a short period, that immediately puts both the man and the female in a state of janaba, which would require a full body wash. Anyone who dreams that he is having intercourse during sleep and yet does not experience emission, then nothing is binding upon him. If a person sees in their dream that they're experiencing intercourse, and they do experience some sort of pleasure, but there's no ejaculation of fluid, then he does not have to do a full body wash for that dream. So a person does not have to think if they experience a pleasure, but there's no ejaculation of fluid, that they would have to do a full body wash because of that pleasure experienced. ومن وجد في ثوبه منيا يابسا لا يدري متى أصابه اغتسل وأعاد ما صلى من آخر نومة نامها فيه. Should he find seminal fluid, whether dry or moist, on his clothes, and he has no idea when that came on him, he must perform a ghusl and repeat any prayers performed prior to that discovery since the last sleep that he had. So if a person finds, during the course of the day or the night, finds a dry mani on his clothes, and he does not know, dry seminal fluid on his clothes, and he does not know when this happened, then he just goes back to the last time he slept, and he would perform a ghusl, and then from the last time he slept, he would repeat any prayers after it. So if he finds it, say at Asr time, and he took a midday nap, then he would do a ghusl and then repeat any prayers after that midday nap. If it's now in mid-morning, duha time, and he finds it on his clothes, then he knows the last time he slept was right before he woke up in the morning. So he would do a ghusl and then just repeat the morning prayer. فصل فرائض الغسل النية عند الشروع والفور والدلك والعموم. The obligation of ghusl are four, and they are as follows. Intention at the onset. And this intention is the same like in wudu. Either he intends by this ghusl that he is removing the state of hadath, the state of impurity, spiritual impurity, or he's doing it because it's an obligation, or he's doing it to make permissible the impermissible. So he knows that for a person in a state of janaba, it's not permissible for him to recite the Quran. So he says, I'm doing this ghusl to be able to recite the Quran. So to make this thing that was prohibited, reciting Quran while in a state of janaba, to make that permissible. And this niyyah, just like in the wudu and in the next section of the tayammum and also in the prayer, the intention, whatever it says that it's an obligation, the intention, the place of intention is in the heart. And it's disliked for a person to actually verbalize the intention. وَالْفَوْرُ, continuity, just like in wudu. وَالدَّلْكُ, rubbing the entire body. وَالْعُمُومَ, and then covering the entire body with water. And making sure to follow up places that could be overlooked. The back of the knees, the crease where the thigh meets the hips, underneath the arms, in the navel, and so forth. And if there's something hard to reach, hard for him to rub, then he can use something like a rope or assign somebody to do the task. So in the case of washing his back, he can use a rope to rub his back or rub it on the side of the shower room where he's washing. وَسُنَنُهُ, the sunan of the ghusl, غَسُلُ الْيَدَيْنِ إِلَى الْكُوعَيْنِ كَالْوُضُوءِ, beginning by washing the two hands up to and including the wrists, as in wudu. وَالْمَضْمَضَةُ, rinsing the mouth. وَالِسْتِنْشَاقُ وَالِسْتِنْثَارُ, rinsing the mouth and lightly sniffing water on the nose, and then lightly blowing water out of the nose. وَغَسْلُ سِمَاخِ الْأُذُنَيْنِ وهي الثقبة الداخلة في الرأس وأما صحفة الأذن فيجب غسل ظاهرها وباطنها. Washing the canal of the ear is a sunnah. As for the earlobe, one is obliged to wash the inner and the outer part. So the actual earlobe has to be washed, the outer part that can be seen, and the inner part which is behind the earlobe, behind the ears. As for the ear canal, it is not an obligation to wash in it, but it is sunnah to actually wash it, and that would be by placing water on the finger and then lightly washing the ear canals. A person would not pour water into the ears because that could damage, that could harm the health. وَفَضَائِلُهُ, the virtuous acts of the ghusl are البداية بغسل النجاسة ثم الذكر فينوي عنده, beginning with the impurity and then washing the private parts, and one should make an intention at that point for removing the impure state. So he begins by removing the impurity. For the male, that would be removing the mani, the fluid that was ejaculated. Or for the woman, after her menstrual blood or after her post-childbirth bleeding, the nifas, that she would wash off the blood. And then wash the entire private parts. And one should make an intention at that point for removing the impure state, because later on the ghusl, they're not, if they come back and wash the private parts again, it would break their wudu. And he's going to mention later that the optimum thing is to perform a wudu and then a ghusl, so that when they step out, they're able to do anything that would require a wudu. So if he did not make the intention of removing the impure state when washing the private part, later on in the ghusl, they're going to have to wash that area again with the intention of removing the janaba, and that would invalidate their wudu if they had it. So it wouldn't be the optimum state for the person to be in. So he should begin by making the intention of removing the impure state from that area. ثم أعضاء الوضوء مرة مرة. Then he says it's recommended to wash the limbs of wudu one time only. This is one opinion within the Maliki Madhab. The other opinion is that he performs a regular wudu, washing the limbs that are washed 3 times, going ahead and washing them 3 times. ثم أعلى جسده. It's also recommended to wash the upper part of the body. So to begin with the head and then the shoulders and then go down. And so a person would not start with washing their feet and then work their way up. وتثليث غسل الرأس. It's also recommended to wash the head 3 times. وتقليل الماء على الأعضاء. Proceeding with the right side of the body first after the head. So it's also recommended to do the right side of the body and then the left side. And then the washing of the head 3 times is just washing the skull area where the hair would normally be, washing that 3 times. It doesn't mean the entire head. ومن نسي لمعة أو عضوا من غسله بادر إلى غسله حين تذكره ولو بعد شهر وأعاد ما صلى قبله وإن أخره بعد ذكره بطل غسله فإن كان في أعضاء الوضوء وصادفه غسل الوضوء أجزأه. Also, conserving water throughout the ghusl is recommended, just as conserving water within the wudu is recommended. And there is no particular amount that a person would have to use to fulfill this recommendation. The Prophet ﷺ would use a mud of water to do his wudu, and a mud is equivalent to about half a liter of water. So to use that amount of water is good, because that's what the Prophet ﷺ used. But if he uses less or more, as long as he knows that he's conserving water in the wudu, that's recommended. In the ghusl, the Prophet ﷺ would use a sa', which is 4 muds, so it would equal about 2 liters of water. So that's how much he used. It would be good to use that amount, but if a person needs more or uses less, as long as he or she knows that they are conserving the water, then they fulfill the recommendation of conserving water. Should one forget a spot on his body or an entire limb, then he should immediately wash it at the time it is recalled, even if a month has elapsed. So if a person has done a complete ghusl and then later on, even after a month, he forgets or more, as long as he knows that he's conserving water in the wudu, that's recommended. In the ghusl, the Prophet ﷺ would use a sa', which is 4 muds, so it would equal about 2 liters of water. So that's how much he used. It would be good to use that amount, but if a person needs more or uses less, as long as he or she knows that they are conserving the water, then they fulfill the recommendation of conserving water. Should one forget a spot on his body or an entire limb, then he should immediately wash it at the time it is recalled, even if a month has elapsed. So if a person has done a complete ghusl and then later on, even after a month, he forgets washing one limb or a portion of the body, he should wash that immediately with the intention of completing this ghusl and removing that state of janaba. Should he delay returning to that missed spot or limb, the entire ghusl is invalidated. So if after remembering he delays washing that limb, and a long time passes, and that long time is again defined by what would normally dry the limbs in moderate weather, if that time passes, the entire ghusl is invalidated because he has not fulfilled the continuity. If it had been one of the limbs of wudu that was missed, but it had been covered at the onset of wudu, when the wudu was performed, this is considered sufficient. So if he, for example, in the ghusl, he forgot to wash his arm, and then later on in the day he did a wudu and washed that limb, even if he didn't remember at the time of washing the limb that he forgot to wash this in the ghusl, as long as he had the intention in the wudu of removing the hadath, it completes his ghusl. So his ghusl is now complete. So say for example a person got up in the morning and needed to do a ghusl. During the ghusl they forgot to wash their right arm, and they went ahead and prayed the morning prayer with that. Later in the day when dhuhr time came around, they did wudu, washing that limb along with the other limbs of wudu. Then after that, they remembered that in the morning during the ghusl, they forgot to wash their right limb, but realized that it had been washed for the dhuhr wudu. So their ghusl is complete, they do not have to do anything, but they would have to repeat the morning prayer because it was performed with a deficient ghusl, and that's why he says, moreover, he must repeat all prayers prayed after that ghusl, meaning if he had prayed any prayers with that deficient ghusl, he would have to repeat them.
لا يحل للجنب دخول المسجد ولا قراءة القرآن إلا الآية ونحوها للتعوذ ونحوه ولا يجوز لمن لا يقدر على الماء البارد أن يأتي زوجته حتى يعد الآلة إلا أن يحتلم فلا شيء عليه.
It is not permissible for a person in a state of major ritual impurity to enter a masjid. So if a place is purchased by the Muslims and dedicated as a masjid, or it's built as a masjid, if it's considered a masjid, then it's not permissible for a person to be in that area while in a state of janaba
or for a woman that's in a state of hayd, it's not permissible for her to be in a state of in the masjid. Nor recite Quran with the exception of an ayah or two or its like, or two for seeking refuge or something similar. So for a person in a state of Janaba, it is not permissible for them to recite the Quran until they do the ghusl, the complete body wash. And with the exception of an ayah or its like. If they're reciting an ayah for seeking refuge or something similar. If a person is going to recite an ayah or two or a short section of a surah for protection against the shaitan or protection before going to sleep, then it's permissible. So for example, if a person is in a state of janaba and they're not going to do their ghusl until later on in the night, but they want to read Ayatul Kursi before going to sleep, then that's permissible. And even if it goes up to an entire surah, such as Surah Al-Jinn, they want to recite it before going to sleep, then that would be considered short enough for them to be able to recite it. But anything longer than that would not be permissible. And he says here, for seeking refuge from the shaitan or from evil before going to sleep or otherwise, or something similar, such as if they see something haram and they're mentioning the hukum, the judgment of that thing to a person, and they want to mention the ayah of the Quran, but they're in a state of janaba. For them, it's permissible to them to mention a few ayahs to mention that hukum. It is also not permissible for the one who is unable to bear cold water to lay with his wife unless he has prepared the necessary means to heat the water. So if a person knows that he needs warm water to do ghusl, he's not able to use cold water. If he uses cold water, he's going to get sick. So he knows that if he gets in a state of janaba and he needs to do ghusl and he cannot find warm water, then he's going to have to do tayammum, the dry earth, attaining purity through using earth. Then for that person, it's not permissible for him to lay with his wife, meaning to put himself in a state of janaba until he gets the necessary means to heat the water. So in some areas, a person does not have direct access to hot water. Like in Mauritania, if you're in the Badia, or even if you're in the city, there's no running hot water. So in the Badia, in the countryside, there's no hot water and there's no running water. So you would have to take water, if you want hot water, to get coals, light a fire, heat it up using a steel kettle, and then you would have hot water. So if a person is in that state, or if he needs to turn on the hot water heater to get hot water, then he cannot put himself in that state of janaba until he knows that he has the necessary means to take him out of it by having the hot water. In the text he says, لا يحل, it's not permissible, but what is actually meant is that it's not haram for him to do that, it's makruh. So it's disliked for him to do something like lay with his wife and take himself out of a state, put himself in a state of janaba, if he has not provided the necessary means to get out of that state. So here when it says it's not permissible, it means that it's makruh or disliked. Should he have a wet dream? There's obviously no blame in it. If a person during the course of the night has a wet dream and an ejaculation of fluid, and now he's in a state of janaba, but he does not have the necessary means to heat up water, and he cannot take a ghusl because he cannot stand cold water because it will make him sick, then in that case there's obviously no blame in that because he did not have control over it. فصل في التيمم ويتيمم المسافر في غير معصية والمريض لفريضة أو نافلة ويتيمم الحاضر الصحيح للفرائض إذا خاف خروج وقتها ولا يتيمم الحاضر الصحيح لنافلة ولا جمعة ولا جنازة إلا إذا تعينت عليه الجنازة. This is the chapter considering tayammum. And tayammum is getting ready for prayer or for tawaf or for things that are an obligation and they do not have water or they cannot use water, so they use tayammum. He says the traveler who is not disobeying Allah in his journey may perform tayammum. If a person is on a travel and he is not disobeying Allah in his journey, then he may perform tayammum for nafila prayers. And the infirm, the sick, may also perform tayammum for both obligations and nafila prayers.
So if a traveler is not disobeying Allah on his journey, he's on a recommended journey, or he's on a obligatory journey, an obligatory journey such as going to Hajj, or going to seek knowledge, or going to take care of obligatory needs of the Muslims. If he's on that journey, an obligatory journey, or on a recommended journey, such as going to visit a friend, going to visit the sick, going to visit a scholar or a righteous man, or he's on a permissible journey, going to seek his livelihood, then for that person, if he does not have water, or if it would make him sick to use water, then he can perform tayammum for both the obligatory prayers and the nafilah prayers. Whereas if a person, he's saying here, if a person is on a disobedient journey, like he's going to seek the haram, or he's going to do the makruh, the disliked, then he does not perform tayammum. But he does perform tayammum for the obligatory prayers. The infirm, the sick, may also perform tayammum for both obligatory obligations and nafilah prayers. If a person's sick, then he would do tayammum for the obligatory prayers, and then also nafilah prayers independent of obligatory prayers. So if a person is sick and he's not doing wudu, he can, if he goes into a masjid and he wants to pray the tahiyyatul masjid, the greeting prayer of the mosque, then he can do tayammum specifically for that nafilah prayer. Or if it's duha time, the mid-morning prayer, and he wants to perform it, or if it's taraweeh, any of the non-obligatory prayers, he can do tayammum specifically for that prayer. So for the traveler who's on a permissible journey, who's not disobedient, and he's doing wudu because he cannot find water, or water would make him sick, then he may perform tayammum for obligatory prayers and for non-obligatory prayers or nafilah prayers. A healthy person who is not on any journey is permitted to perform tayammum should he be fearful of losing the proper prayer time if he delays the prayer in order to do the wudu. So for a healthy person who's doing tayammum because he does not have water, then he can do tayammum only for the obligatory prayers. He cannot do tayammum for a non-obligatory prayers, specifically for that non-obligatory prayer. He may do it for an obligatory prayer and then pray a sunnah prayer after with that same tayammum, but he cannot do a tayammum specifically for a sunnah prayer, just as the traveler or the sick person would do so. And he could also do tayammum if he's fearful of losing the prayer time. So because the prayer time, according to the Maliki scholars, is given precedence over the purification. If a person does not have water, and he knows that by looking for water, or by doing a ghusl, or by doing wudu, he's going to lose the prayer time, then he would do tayammum and perform the prayer in its proper time, rather than delaying it and perform the prayer with wudu outside of the prayer time. So according to the dominant opinion of the Maliki scholars, the prayer time is given precedence over the purification of wudu or ghusl, so he would go to tayammum. So if a person, say for example, wakes up at the end of the night and he needs to do a ghusl or even just wudu, and he does not have enough time, he knows the sun is about to rise, then he would leave the ghusl or leave the wudu and he would do tayammum so that he could pray in the prayer time. But the healthy resident is not permitted to perform tayammum for nafilah prayers, Friday congregational prayers, nor the funeral prayer unless it was an obligation upon him to perform it. So this healthy resident who is not doing wudu, he's doing tayammum because he cannot find water, it is not permitted for him to perform tayammum specifically for nafilah prayers, nor for the Friday, for the Jum'ah prayers, or for the funeral prayer, the janazah, unless it was an obligation. So for the Friday prayer, the healthy resident does not do tayammum for it if he cannot find water, unless he knows that the entire time of dhuhr is going to pass and he won't find any water. So for him, he goes ahead and prays Jum'ah with tayammum. Whereas if Jum'ah time comes and he does not have water now, but he knows that later in the time of dhuhr he will find water, he leaves praying Jum'ah with tayammum and delays until he can pray dhuhr with wudu. Also, he does not pray a funeral prayer unless it's an obligation. So the funeral prayer is a collective obligation, fard kifaya, if other people are fulfilling that obligation. But if nobody else fulfills it, nobody else is praying upon that dead person, and now this healthy resident who's only doing tayammum, if he's the only person that can pray, it now becomes an individual obligation, a fard ayn upon him to pray upon this person. So now he would do tayammum specifically for that fard prayer. Now, two things that the author does not go into detail here are when a person would do tayammum, and that's either for fear of sickness or for lack of water. So for fear of sickness, a person would do tayammum because of one of three things. Either he fears that using water would cause him to become sick, would increase his already present sickness, or would delay the healing of his present sickness. So if he fears one of those three things, then he can go from wudu or ghusl to performing tayammum, doing the purification through the dry earth. The way he would know this, it can't be that he just thinks that he's going to get sick, or he has a light feeling that he'll go and get sick. He has to know either through prior experience, or a doctor told him not to do this. The doctor said, I know that if you use water in this, if you use water, it's going to cause you to get sick, it's going to increase your wound, or whatever it may be. So in that case, if he knows, he's done wudu in that instance before, when he had this similar sickness and it increased it, he had just a runny nose, then he did wudu, and then it caused him to have a bad flu, then he would do tayammum. So if he fears sickness, he fears increasing the already present sickness or delaying the healing, and he knows this either through prior experience or through a knowledgeable doctor who told him not to do wudu, then he can do tayammum. The other situation would be where he does not have any water. But before jumping to tayammum, he has to analyze his situation. If he thinks that he can go and buy water, he has to go and buy water, as long as the price is not very high. If he thinks that he can go and he can ask his neighbors or people in his surrounding area for water, he would have to do that. He would have to go and seek out a way to get water and travel in his radius, make sure that he can go, what they say, about the radius of about 1.5 miles of his area to find water. So it's not that he does not, just because he doesn't have water at that specific time, he jumps to tayammum. Or he can go and buy water, or he can ask for it and somebody will give it to him, or he can borrow it from somebody and promise to pay him back. Then he has to do that before jumping to tayammum. The other thing that this text does not go into is if a person has just a wound on a certain portion of the body. If he has, say, just a cut on a certain area of the body, then he doesn't say, well, if I wash this wound, it's going to increase it, and so I'm going to do tayammum. What he does is he looks at that wound. If he can wash the area around the wound and then merely wipe over the wound, then he would not skip the wudu and then go to tayammum. He would complete his wudu and just wash the area around the wound and then lightly wipe over that wound. If he thinks that even wiping over the wound will cause it to become worse or delay the healing, then he puts something over the wound like a bandage, and then he wipes over the bandage. If he knows that even that would harm him, then in that situation, then he could go to tayammum. وفرائض التيمم النية والصعيد الطاهر ومسح الوجه ومسح اليدين إلى الكوعين وضربة الأرض الأولى والفور ودخول الوقت واتصاله بالصلاة. This is the section on the obligations of tayammum. The obligations of tayammum are an intention. So he has to have an intention when doing this tayammum that he's not unlike in wudu, he doesn't have the choice of one of the three things to make the intention. He can only make the intention of one of two things: either permitting the impermissible or the obligation. But he would not intend the removal of the hadath, because tayammum does not remove the state of impurity from this person. It merely allows this person to perform this act of worship when he does not have water, or he fears the use of water. The use of water would cause him harm. So he makes one of those two intentions, either that this tayammum is an obligation, or that he's permitting the impermissible.
permitting the impermissible, like praying without wudu is haram, so he wants to make it permissible by doing tayammum. The second is Sa'id al-Tahir, pure surface of the earth. And pure surface of the earth, he's going to mention what would be included in this, and he's going to mention things such as dirt and earth, sand, rock, and so forth. وَمَسْحُ الْوَجْهِ, also wiping the face. Just as it was defined in wudu, the face, here in tayammum, that area, the face would be wiped after touching the pure earth. And then wiping the hands up to and including the wrists, that is an obligation. And then also wiping in between the fingers. Then also continuity in the action, that he does not leave a space of time in between the wiping of the face and the wiping of the hands. And then also entrance of the obligatory prayers time. So the tayammum, if it's going to be done, can only be done after the prayers time has actually entered. If he does it before the prayer time has entered, it is not a valid tayammum. Also, that it is connected to the prayer without interruption. That he does the prayer, that he does the tayammum, and then shortly thereafter he performs the prayer. Whereas if he does the tayammum, and then a long time passes before he prays, he has to repeat the tayammum. وَالصَّعِيدُ هو التراب والطوب والحجر والثلج والخضخاض ونحو ذلك ولا يجوز بالجص المطبوخ والحصير والخشب والحشيش ونحوه ورخص للمريض في حائط الحجر والطوب إن لم يجد مناولا غيره. The earth's surface, or the sa'id, includes dirt, things such as dirt, adobe, which is unbaked mud brick, stone, snow, if he's not able to melt the snow and use the water for wudu, because that would it would be too cold and it would harm him, or he doesn't have the means to melt it, then he does tayammum on the snow. Marsh, which is like the khadkhad, just it's not water and it's not hard earth, it's muddy, it's mud. So he would do tayammum. He could do tayammum with that. And things like that. So things that are constituents of the earth, things that are part of the earth, he could do tayammum on them. It is not permitted with baked plaster, so things that are taken from the earth, but they go through a change. It's not permissible to do tayammum upon that, like plaster. So gypsum, if it's taken from the earth, in its natural state, it can be tayammum can be performed upon it. But once it's been cooked and changed, now tayammum can no longer be performed on it. Similar things such as cement or other things that go through a process that changes their makeup, so it's no longer permissible to perform tayammum on them. Grass mats, even though that's from the earth, it's not permissible to do tayammum on it because it has to be something a part of the earth, a constituent of the earth. Wood is also not permissible to do tayammum on, or foliage such as grass. It is permitted for a sick person to use stone or adobe wall of a house with the condition that they cannot find anyone to bring something more acceptable, such as a stone. So if a person is in a house and he's doing tayammum and the walls of his house are made of unbaked mud brick or stone, then he can do tayammum on that wall. And he's saying here it's only permissible if he cannot find somebody to bring him something. But the dominant opinion is that he can do tayammum upon the wall, whether or not he can find somebody to bring him something else, and even if he's not sick. As long as the wall is made of stone and there's nothing covering it, like paint or a sealant, or it's made from unbaked clay, then he can do, both the sick and the healthy person can do tayammum upon that. Whereas if a wall is made out of drywall, or it's painted, or made from cement, it is not permissible to perform tayammum upon that. وَسُنَنُهُ, the sunan of tayammum are تجديد الصعيد ليديه ومسح ما بين الكوعين والمرفقين والترتيب. Striking the earth a second time for the wiping of the hands. So the obligatory was
touching the earth once, or the stone, and then wiping the face, and then he could actually use that first contact with the earth to wipe his hands, but it's sunnah for him to make contact with the earth again, a second time, for the wiping of the hands. وَمَسْحُ مَا بَيْنَ الْكُوعَيْنِ وَالْمِرْفَقَيْنِ. Also, it's sunnah to wipe the two arms from the wrist up to and including the elbows. So we said wiping the hands up to and including the wrist is an obligation. From the wrists up to and including the elbows is a sunnah. There are some opinions that it's an obligation to wipe up to and including the arms, but according to the Maliki Madhab, the obligation is to wipe up to and including the wrists, and then it would be sunnah to complete the wipe up to and including the elbows. Also, following the given sequence. So in the Quran, it says wipe your face. When doing tayammum, wipe your face and then your arms. So to do the face first and then the arms is considered a sunnah. وَفَضَائِلُهُ, the virtuous acts of tayammum are التسمية وتقديم اليمنى على اليسرى وتقديم ظاهر الذراع على باطنه ومقدمه على مؤخره. The virtuous acts are saying Bismillah. So at the first contact with the earth, a person would say Bismillah. That's recommended. Then proceeding with the right side, then the left, just as in wudu, you would do the right arm first and then the left. Then wiping the outer portion of the arm first, prior to the inner portion of the arm, and then wiping the arm beginning with the tips of the fingers to the elbows. So this the wiping of the outer arm prior to the inner arm, and then wiping the arm beginning with the tips of the fingers to the elbows is what's called wasfun hamid. So that's where he would wipe beginning with the tips of the fingers, start with his left hand, wiping his right arm, the outer portion all the way down to his elbow, come around and then wipe the bottom portion of his arm up to the tips of his fingers from the bottom portion of his hand. And then use the bottom portion of his hand to wipe the fingers. So the entire tayammum would be that he begins by saying Bismillah at the first contact of the earth. Then he wipes his face, making sure to get under the nose, and then wiping over any facial hair. And then a second contact with the earth, and then he does the wasfun hamid. He would take the bottom of his left hand to the tips of his right fingers on the outer portion of his right hand, and then wipe it all the way down to the elbow, then go around the elbow, and now wipe from the inner portion of his arm, from the elbow up to the tips of the fingers, and then he would kind of clasp each finger individually and wipe it, so that he's wiping the inner portion of his fingers of his right hand with the bottom of his left hand. So he would not interlace them like he did in wudu, because the insides of the fingers of the left hand did not touch the ground. So if he were to do that, he's touching the inside of his right fingers with the inside of his left fingers, and the inside of the left fingers did not touch the ground. So for that reason, he would clasp each finger of his right hand with his left hand and then wipe them individually, so that the insides of the right finger are being touched with something that was that made contact with the ground. And then he does the same for the left arm. He would take the bottom of his right hand to the tips of his left hand on the back portion of the hand, wipe all the way down to the elbow, come around the inside portion of the arm up to the fingers, and then wipe the inside of the fingers with the bottom of the right hand. نواقض التيمم. ونواقضه كالوضوء ولا تصلى فريضتان بتيمم واحد، ومن تيمم لفريضة جاز له النوافل بعدها ومس المصحف والطواف والتلاوة إن نوى ذلك واتصلت بالصلاة ولم يخرج الوقت، وجاز بتيمم النافلة كل ما ذكر إلا الفريضة. The same things which nullify wudu nullify tayammum. Everything that was mentioned in the section of those things which nullify wudu, if they were to happen, they nullify the tayammum, with the addition of one thing, which is finding water before going into the prayer. So if a person does tayammum, and then before beginning the prayer, somebody comes and says, here's some water, or he sees water that he didn't know about, then his prayer is the tayammum is invalid, and he has to do wudu. Whereas if he's now entered into this prayer, and then after he is entered in, somebody brings him the water, his prayer is correct, he completes it, because he went into it in a valid state. Moreover, one cannot pray 2 obligatory prayers with 1 tayammum. So each tayammum, you can only pray 1 fard prayer with it, 1 obligatory prayer. If a person, for whatever reason, is praying 2 prayers together, like in certain situations when a person is traveling, they join the 2 prayers, Dhuhr and Asr, and then Maghrib and Isha. He would have to, and he's doing tayammum for either fear of sickness or for lack of water, then he would do 1 tayammum for the first prayer, the first obligatory prayer, and then do a second tayammum once he's done with the first one, and then he performs the second one. So he could not perform 2 obligatory prayers with 1 tayammum. Although one may pray nafilah after the obligatory prayers with the same tayammum used in the obligatory prayer. If a person did an obligatory prayer and did tayammum for that, after he has completed that obligatory prayer, if he wants to pray nafilah prayers after that, he can do so. So the sunnahs after Dhuhr, or after Maghrib, or after Isha, he can do that with the same tayammum that he used for the obligatory prayers. He does not have to do a new tayammum. So if a person wants to pray the Taraweeh prayer, and he's doing tayammum for whatever reason, he would do tayammum for the Isha prayer, and then he would stand up, and then pray the Taraweeh. The person can also use the same tayammum for touching the copy of the Quran, circumambulation, tawaf, and recitation if he had intended that. It followed immediately after the prayer, and the time of the prayer has not expired. So if a person wants to do something that requires wudu, then if he has done tayammum and prayed the prayer, he can do that thing after the prayer with that tayammum. So reciting the Quran requires a person to have done a complete ghusl after Djanaba. Or doing tawaf requires wudu. Touching the mushaf requires wudu. So all these things that require wudu or require ghusl, if a person has done tayammum, has a right to do tayammum, and he does it and he prays, then he can do those things after that prayer, as long as he does it immediately after the prayer. So immediately after the prayer, he picks up the mushaf and he reads from it. He does not have wudu, but he did tayammum for that obligatory prayer. He does tawaf, circumambulation of the Kaaba. He can do that right after the prayer, using that same tayammum that he had prayed that obligatory prayer with. Or the recitation of Quran, because this person who's in a state of Djanaba, he's doing tayammum, and then after the prayer, he recites Quran. Because normally, for the person in a state of Djanaba, it's not permissible for him to recite Quran. But this person, because he did tayammum for an obligatory prayer, after it, it's permissible for him to recite Quran. He says here, though, that one of the conditions is that he had intended that at the time of tayammum, he intended that not only is he going to do this obligatory prayer, but he's actually also going to do that other act of worship after the prayer. Imam Al-Akhdari has mentioned this, but according to the dominant opinion of the Madhab, that is not a condition. So even if he did not make that intention, he can still do those things after the obligatory prayer is finished. Another condition is that the time of the prayer has not expired. So he can keep doing that thing as long as the time of that prayer has not expired. So after Asr, he touches the mushaf, and he keeps doing it. He can do so as long as Maghrib has not come in. ومن صلى العشاء بتيمم قام للشفع والوتر بعدها من غير تأخير ومن تيمم من جنابة فلا بد من نيتها. Should one perform Isha prayer with tayammum, then in order to do the even and odd night prayer, the shafa' and the witr, it must be done immediately after the obligatory prayer without delay. So he can do the tayammum for the obligatory prayer, which in this case is the Isha, and then the prayer which is after it, the nafilah of the shafa' and the sunnah of the witr, he can do it with that same tayammum. He does not have to do another one, as long as he does it immediately after and does not delay it. And a delay would mean something like the amount of time that he can have between the end of the obligatory prayer and the starting of that other act is the time it would take to say the Subhanallah 33, the Alhamdulillah 33, and Allahu Akbar 33. If he delays it more than that time, then he can no longer use that same tayammum for this act. He says also, Rahimullah, Imam Al-Akhdari says, should one do tayammum in a state of major ritual impurity, Djanaba,
he must intend tayammum for that purpose. So if a person is doing tayammum because of janaba, he's in a state of major ritual impurity, and he's doing tayammum because he cannot find water, he fears sickness, or he fears that the time of the prayer will go out, then when he does the tayammum, not only does he have to have the intention of making permissible the impermissible, or the obligation of tayammum, but he also has to make present the intention that he's doing this tayammum from a state of janaba. This next section is the chapter concerning menstruation. فَصْلٌ فِي الْحَيْضِ. This chapter is not only a necessity for every single Muslim woman to learn, but it's also incumbent for many men to learn. Because in the case of a woman, it's clear. She has to know these rules because she experiences these things. And for a man, he most of the time, every man will have a sister, will have a mother, a daughter, a wife, some woman around him that it will be incumbent upon him to teach her. So he has to know these rules so that he can teach her these rules. Because it is incumbent upon every man to teach his wife, to teach his daughters, and to teach his sisters, to teach them their fard ayn, to teach them the rules that they need to know so that they can properly worship Allah. And also for a man with his wife, he needs to know to follow her menstrual cycle, because there are certain things, certain times when they cannot have normal husband-wife relationships. And even if the man is married to a non-Muslim woman, a Jew or a Christian woman, he has to know these rules, because even for her, after she completes her menstrual cycle, she has to do a complete body wash before he can have relations with her. So he has to follow the menstrual cycle for her so that he can tell her when she's considered by Sharia menstruating and when she's not. The other reason that it's important to learn these rules is because Sharia has a definition for the hayd, for the menstruation, and the post-childbirth bleeding of a woman, regardless of what the doctors say. So we might find that a gynecologist considers hayd something hayd, but the Sharia does not consider it hayd. And we might see that the gynecologist considers something that not hayd, and the Sharia does consider it hayd. So a person has to know the Sharia rulings regarding the rules of hayd. Women fall into three categories: وَالنِّسَاءُ مُبْتَدَأَةٌ وَمُعْتَادَةٌ وَحَامِلٌ. A woman who's experiencing hayd or menstrual blood for the first time, a woman who's an experienced woman, meaning that she has had a previous cycle so that she can judge what is her normal cycle, even if that previous cycle was only one time. So the mubtada'a is the woman that is experiencing her menstrual cycle for the first time. She has a specific hukum, and she will only use that hukum for the first time she's menstruating. The second time she menstruates, now she's considered an experienced woman because she uses her previous and first menstrual cycle to judge as her normal cycle. And then the pregnant woman. Since during pregnancy, according to the Maliki scholars, the blood that a woman experiences is considered hayd, and they know that during pregnancy the blood would be abnormally long, they have a specific hukum for her. وأكثر الحيض للمبتدأة 15 يوما وللمعتادة عادتها فإن تمادى بها الدم زادت 3 أيام ما لم تجاوز 15 يوما. The longest menstrual cycle of a woman on her first period is 15 days. This is the hukum for the mubtada'a, for the woman on her first period. If she bleeds a few days and then the blood cuts off, then the matter is clear. She does a ghusl, and now it becomes incumbent upon her to pray and to fast and so forth. Now she's reached an age of taklif, reached an age of responsibility. If, however, the blood keeps going, she does not have a normal cycle to see what how many days it would normally be. This is the first time. So if the blood keeps coming and does not cut off, then we do not say she's a menstruating woman as long as the blood is there. The Sharia has given a definite term, and that's 15 days. For 15 days, as long as the blood is there, she considers herself to be menstruating. After 15 days, if the blood does not cut off, then she would
she would consider that this is no longer hayd. She would do a ghusl and then go on to praying, and she would consider any blood that she experiences after that to be istihada blood. And so she is now mustahada. She is no longer in hayd. She is now in what the Sharia would consider a sickness. وَلِلْمُعْتَادَةِ عَادَتُهَا. For an experienced woman, the longest menstrual cycle that the longest thing she considers to be a menstrual cycle would be according to her normal period and then adding 3 days. Should the bleeding continue past her normal cycle, as long as it does not exceed 15 days also. So for the woman that has a normal period, a normal cycle, if the blood comes and reaches the amount of that normal cycle and then cuts off, the matter is clear. If, however, the blood keeps coming, what she does is she adds 3 days to her largest normal cycle, and then after that, if the blood is still there, she considers herself to be no longer in hayd, no longer in menstruation. So for example, if a woman's normal cycle sometimes is 5 days, sometimes is 6 days, sometimes is 7 days, and now the blood has come 5 days, it's on its 5th day, on its 6th day, on its 7th day, and on the 8th day it's still coming. So what she does is she takes her largest normal cycle, which in this example would be 7 days, adds 3 days to the 7 days, making 10 days. So after 10 days of bleeding, she no longer considers this blood to be menstrual blood. Then on the next month, if the blood were to continue abnormally long, she would add 3 days to the 10, making it 13. And then on the next month, if it keeps going, she would add 2 to the 12, because she cannot exceed 15 days, considering herself a menstruating woman. If her longest normal cycle is, say, 12 days, she would add 3, making it 15. If her largest normal cycle is 2 weeks, 14 days, she wouldn't add 3 and make it 17. She would only add 1, going to 15. Because the longest a woman can be considered in a state of menstruation, a state of hayd, is 15 days. وللحامل بعد 3 أشهر 15 يوما ونحوها وبعد 6 أشهر وعشرون ونحوها. As for a pregnant woman, if bleeding occurs after 3 months, then it should not exceed 20 days. As for a pregnant woman, if it's after 3 months, and in Arabic it says بعد 3 أشهر, and what it means is بعد الدخول في الشهر الثالث, after entering into her 3rd month. So after entering in, not after the completion of the 3 months, but after entering into her 3rd month of pregnancy, if she experiences blood, then the longest, she does not go to her normal cycle. What she does is she considers herself to be in a state of menstruation until 20 days. If bleeding goes past 20 days, then she does not consider herself to be in a menstruation. Should it occur after 6 months, then it should not exceed 25 to 30 days. If she experiences bleeding after entering into her 6th month of pregnancy, then the bleeding, if it goes past 25 days, or some scholars say 30 days, then after that, on the 26th day, she would do a ghusl, and even if the blood is there, is no longer, she does not consider it to be menstrual blood, she considers it to be istihada blood. فإن تقطع الدم لفقت أيامه حتى تكمل عادتها. If the blood flows intermittently, then she should add up the number of days in which there is flow until she completes her normal cycle. If a woman experiences a normal hayd, she will experience it for a certain number of days and then it will cut off. And during those days, the blood will remain there. If during the course of her period, the blood flows intermittently, it comes 1 day and then it stops 1 day, it comes 2 days and then it stops, then she adds up those days. She adds up the days together until she reaches her normal cycle, or whatever category she is. She goes until the most of that category. So if she's a first-time woman experiencing her first menstrual cycle, then she would keep adding the days together until but she would not go past 15 days. The experienced woman would keep adding the days together until she goes 3 days past her normal cycle, and then she would no longer consider it hayd. And then for the pregnant woman, she would either go 20 days if she experienced it after the entrance into her 3rd month of pregnancy, or 25 to 30 days if she was in her 6th month of pregnancy.
ولا يحل للحائض صلاة ولا صوم ولا طواف ولا مس مصحف. It is not lawful for a menstruating woman to perform prayer, fasting, circumambulation, touch a copy of the Quran. So for a menstruating woman, she cannot pray. It's haram for her to do so. It's haram for her to fast. If the menstruating blood started after she began fasting, then her fast is broken, and she should not complete it. She should also not start any new fasts. Also circumambulation. It's not permissible for her to do tawaf around the Kaaba, or to touch a copy of the Quran. She cannot touch a copy of the Quran, a mushaf, if it's merely the Arabic. Whereas if it's, say, a tafsir of the Quran, that would be permissible for her. ولا دخول مسجد. It's also not permissible for her to enter a masjid. وعليها قضاء الصوم دون الصلاة وقراءتها جائزة. Moreover, she must make up the days of fasting missed, but not the prayers missed during her cycle. It is permissible for her to recite Quran from memory during her cycle. So she must make up the days of fasting during her cycle. If she missed any of the days of Ramadan during her cycle, she has to make those up, but she does not have to make the prayers that she missed during her cycle. وَقِرَاءَتُهَا جَائِزَةٌ. It is permissible for her to recite Quran from memory during her cycle. According to the Maliki scholars, for the woman in a state of menstruation, she can recite Quran from memory. ولا يحل لزوجها فرجها ولا ما بين سرتها وركبتها حتى تغتسل. Her private parts are unlawful for her husband during this time, and this includes what is between the navel and the knees until she performs a ghusl. So everything between the navel and the knees for the husband to derive pleasure from that, whether it's through intercourse or other means, touching is not permissible for a husband with his wife during the menstrual cycle. And when it says that he cannot derive pleasure from what is between her navel and her knees, this is direct contact to her skin. Whereas if he's deriving pleasure from what's between her navel and her knees, if it's from above clothing, then that would be permissible. And so he cannot derive pleasure or have intercourse with her until she performs a ghusl. So even after the blood stops, it's not permissible for him to derive pleasure from that area until she performs a ghusl. فصل في النفاس. This is the chapter on lochial bleeding, and it's the bleeding that occurs after a woman gives birth. والنفاس كالحيض في منعه وأكثره 60 يوما. Lochial blood, or post-childbirth bleeding, is the same as menstrual blood concerning what is not lawful. So all the things that were mentioned that are prohibited for the menstruating woman to do, and for her husband to derive pleasure from that area during the bleeding, the same goes for during the time when she's experiencing post-childbirth bleeding. The longest period of bleeding is 60 days. If the bleeding after the childbirth occurs at a certain number of days and then cuts off, the matter is clear. But if the blood keeps going, the longest that she would consider herself to be in a state of lochial bleeding is 60 days. After that, she would perform a ghusl and go about her normal routine of worship, and she would not pay attention to the istihada blood, in that it does not require her to do a ghusl, but she would, if just like in the wudu, it would break her, just like in the nifas, that istihada blood, the blood that's coming after the normal period, would break the wudu, unless it's coming a lot, so much that it would create a hardship for her to do wudu. فإن انقطع الدم قبلها ولو في يوم الولادة اغتسلت وصلت. If the blood ceases flowing during that time, even if on the same day as the birth, then she should perform ghusl and begin to pray. So just like in the case of the nifas, the woman in hayd, in menstruation, when as soon as the blood stops, she performs a ghusl, even if it's on the day of the birth. And also, if a woman has given birth and does not experience any postpartum bleeding, then she would still have to perform a ghusl, because the mere childbirth requires a ghusl. فإن عاودها الدم فإن كان بينهما 15 يوما فأكثر كان الثاني حيضا وإلا ضم إلى الأول وكان من تمام النفاس. Should the flow of blood resume, Then if it had stopped for longer than 15 days, it should be considered menstrual blood. And if less than that, she should add it up to the previous days and consider it part of the 60 days until they are complete. So say this woman during her nifas bleeding, it's coming and it's going. It's not coming consecutively. There's a few days where she experiences bleeding and then it stops and then she bleeds again. So what she would do was she would add up all the days until she reached 60 days. And this is if the blood, between the blood, there's not 15 days of consecutive purity. Whereas if the blood stops for a few days and then comes back and then stops for a period of 15 days, she goes 15 complete days without experiencing any blood. Then if she experienced blood, the next blood she experiences is considered a new menstrual cycle. She goes back to the rules of a menstruating woman. In her case, whether it's she would go to her normal cycle, and then and so on. So if it comes before 15 days, say the blood stops and then comes after 10 days, then she would consider that as part of the nifas bleeding. For both the woman in nifas, the postpartum bleeding, and also the woman experiencing menstrual blood, if the blood comes, even if it's one drop, she considers that entire day to be considered a day of menstruation. So when we say 7 days, it could, and it's usually 7 days of continuous bleeding with minor interruption. But if it comes, even if it's one drop, she considers this entire day to be one of the days of her cycle. If the blood comes and then stops, so she considers that on her tally to be one of the days of her menstrual cycle or one of the days of her nifas bleeding. But then immediately she would do a ghusl and pray and continue praying until the blood comes back again. So in theory, a woman could be praying and be fasting her entire the course of her menstruation. An example of that would be she experiences blood for an hour or two at night. It cuts off. Before the Fajr, she makes her intention to fast, and then she fasts, and she prays all those prayers after having done a ghusl. And then the next night it comes back, and so every day she would consider that entire day to be one of the days of menstruation, but she would be fasting and praying during those times. If the blood ceases, and she knows that it's going to come back during the time of the prayer, then she does not have to do a ghusl and pray. But if she knows that the blood is not going to come back until after that prayer time is over, then she would do a ghusl and pray at that time. Also, for a woman that does not, if she feels that the blood is constantly flowing, then she does not have to check it. But if she does not know whether their blood is there, she should be checking every single prayer time to see that if the blood has stopped, then she should make a ghusl and then perform the prayer of that the prayer of that time. The times that she would not have to check to see if she had stopped bleeding is after she has gone to sleep and before Fajr. So she should not wake up at the end of the night to see whether her the menstrual blood has stopped, so that she can pray Maghrib and Isha. She should just continue sleeping until Subh, but she should wake up in the morning time to see if the blood has stopped. If it has stopped, then she does a ghusl and she prays the Subh prayer, the morning prayer.